I think it's so often within the church very easy to point out what to fix in people, and to point out like what we don't believe is right and try to fix that.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to something as personal as sexuality. Like, it's not as simple as flipping a switch.
We are excited to share today's story with you. Please note that some of the topics discussed may be sensitive topics for some audiences. Please read through the show notes for a heads up on the topics discussed and events covered in today's story. If it does not seem like it will be a good episode for you to listen to, we invite you to come back next week to hear our next story. Welcome to This Is My Story, a podcast dedicated to sharing your story and how God has helped you take next steps in your journey of faith. I'm your host, Austin Carrick, and let's dive into today's story. Hey, welcome to today's podcast. My name is Austin, and I am here joined by Nate King. Nate, say hello to the people.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
Hey, thanks for being here with us today, Nate. So we are going to be telling Nate's story and his journey of just growing up, hearing the word of God like so many of us have. Some people haven't, and just where he has in his life, where he has had allowed things to just become barriers between him and God, and that feeling of what I've done, God's not going to love me, he's not going to pursue me. But as we know, God still pursued you anyways, and just that revelation and that journey that you've been on in your life. So Nate, thank you for sharing that with us today. We hope that that's going to be an encouragement to somebody. So go ahead and lay down the foundation. So where does Nate's story start?
Yeah, so I grew up to a Christian family. My parents, took me going to church every week. And yeah, I thought I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior when I was probably 4. And I definitely think that there was some realness to that for sure. I remember just being overjoyed by Jesus growing up and just going to Sunday school and everything and just loving everything about it.
Did you grow up in like a flannel graph Sunday school?
I did. Yes, we had the flannel graphs, and I miss those.
Somebody just said that recently. It was actually Pastor Kurt. Pastor Kurt brought it up, and he was like, "I remember Easter Sunday, the flannel graphs," and I was like, "Oh my gosh!"
Yes,
took me back for a moment.
Absolutely.
Oh,
yeah,
that's awesome. So grew up in a flannel graph Sunday school.
Yes, yeah. We so just kept going to church, and I remember trying to make my faith my own. And realizing pretty early on that my story probably isn't going to be the same as everyone else's.
Yeah.
I grew up in Lancaster City, and from my best friend was when I was 4 was a neighbor girl named Suli, and we just became best friends. But that invoked a lot of bullying pretty early on of a little boy being best friends with a little girl.
Yeah.
So definitely. It was interesting growing up in the church and then feeling like you're a little different at the same time.
Yeah. Interesting. So you start this journey again young, as we all do in life. And you're saying, so you start having friends that are girls, and people are kind of, I mean, I'm going to be honest, like I was that way when I was when I was young, where I was like, no, girls, I'm not going to be friends with girls. People who are friends with girls, that's weird. So I apologize as somebody who gave that off as a kid. So what was that like for you then? So your life is, again, you're going to church, trying to make your faith your own. And you have this realization like, oh, okay, like my friends are girls and everybody else's friends are boys. So like as a child, what kind of thoughts were going in your head?
Yeah, I didn't think anything of it. First and foremost, my parents were totally okay with everything, which shout out to my parents. They were amazing. My mom's still amazing. And I think like that obviously invoked, people thought, okay, well, this guy's gay. He's calling. So the first time I heard like the F-A-G word, it was, pretty early on, directed at me when I was like 6, and just believing that there might be some truth to that, but also at the same time not understanding what that even meant.
Yeah.
And then flash forward to like puberty and going through puberty and realizing that my friends and their attractions were not the same as mine, and that the things that they were struggling with and the things that I was being told I was supposed to be struggling with by both my parents or, youth group and the men's connects and stuff like that, was not where I was. And and that my attractions were not towards women in that way, but towards other dudes. So that was trying to wrestle that, and also not necessarily even believing that myself of, okay, like, this is real, you know, like this is not just I couldn't believe it myself. Like I would say, nah, like that's not true. That's not me. Like I'm not into that, whatever it may be. But I knew I wasn't being drawn toward women in that way. So
So you were like, I know this is bad. I'm not supposed to do this. So, almost suppressing it, if I were to guess. Kind of like, okay, I'm having these feelings. This is sin. I know what the Bible says about this. And were you trying to separate yourself from that in identity, or were you like, people see me as something because I act a certain way or I think a certain way? And like you're saying, these most men's connects are, we're shooting guns and we're eating barbecue, which I love those kind of things.
Who doesn't love a good barbecue?
A good barbecue and gun shoots.
Absolutely.
But to you weren't relating to any of that. And you were like, okay, so like, where were you in that then? So like,
I think it was definitely like okay, I'm a Christian, therefore I need to look a certain way, or I need to do certain things, or I need to act a certain way. And then also wrestling with the fact that like, this is a part, like you had asked like the identity question, and like, while I knew I shouldn't, like there was something that was holding on to that little box of like, I want to accept this. I want to embrace this. I remember when like pride events started coming, big thing, like having this like pain of just like wanting to, you know, express myself that way, wanting to come alongside a community that way. And just be a part of something that felt natural to me. And I think that was something that like really hurt growing up, was hearing that like, oh, this is unnatural. This is, you know, not what God intended, which I like know now it's not, but in the sense of it's natural. It was natural to me in the sense of like I didn't necessarily wake up and choose, you know, to be attracted to something. Like I didn't choose my attractions. I didn't choose how my body react to things. But hearing that and then not really being given any grace or an alternative, it was just like, straight is the normal, straight is the default, and period. So it was like, it wasn't discussed, at least growing up.
So if you're thinking something else, then you're just a sinner and go away.
And it was like, almost as like, and especially the, oh, you chose this, or pray the gay away, were like two huge things, at least growing up, that I heard a lot. And so like, I didn't tell anybody. I just like kept living my life. Teen years were definitely a journey. It was interesting because I never left the church, and I was still very involved in the church, involved through youth group, all throughout that, really trying to work on my relationship with God, but still holding this box and still like keeping it of like, I don't want to give this up. This is a part of who I am. And then I ended up working through high school, graduating, and I was actually, it's a little embarrassing, but I was a leader in the youth group. And I still hadn't told anybody. And after a youth event, I was feeling like really down and out about something. And there was this newer woman that joined. She's like still one of my dearest friends. And we went to Sheets afterwards with the youth group. And me and her were just outside talking. And for some reason that night, I just spilled my guts and told her everything. And the second I told her, like this huge weight just like lifted from my chest that I'd been carrying my whole life, of just like, I'm never going to tell anybody this. Like, how could anyone understand? How can anyone forgive me?
The interesting thing in that, sorry, not to cut you off, but like that weight you're saying you felt lifted, like one thing we talk about here specifically at Victory, and I hope if somebody's at another church, like your church does this, or if you're not in one, get a part of one. But we talk about finding freedom through groups. And the heart of that is, yes, to have community with people, but when you can face somebody that's a believer and you can say, hey, this is something that I'm struggling with. Like, this is something that's been going on in my mind and in my heart. And like, and you can share that vulnerably with somebody. Like, that's when you find that freedom and you feel that weight lifted off, when you've made that recognition of like, hey, something's not right. And I've been carrying this for a long time. Like, would you be in prayer with me about
Yeah.
this? Would you agree with me? Be in agreeance, like to the Lord, like, hey, Lord,
Yeah.
continue to process this in me and move me towards righteousness and move me towards you. So I just want to point that out in
Yeah.
that point of like, that's a human thing. And like in the Psalms, there's a psalm that says that like before I was even conceived, like sin, I was sinful. Like I was conceived at the moment and I was sinful. And like you're saying, like you came into the world and you were struggling with these things and you didn't know why. And that's because we're born into a sinful body and a sinful nature that we're never going to understand why we have these certain pulls towards certain things. But that's because we're just bent towards sin. So I just want to make that point in that too, because I was processing that as you were talking, like that relief that we feel when we can align with another believer and say, hey, this is something I'm walking through. This is where I'm at. Like what a relief that brings to us as Christians. So,
and the devil always wants to isolate us too.
Exactly.
He wants us to stay, caught up in our head. He wants us to not have, people alongside fighting with us. And growing up, I was always told like, you can only talk to guys about certain things. You can't talk to girls about certain things because that can open up the door to emotional attachment or whatever it may be. And so with my struggles, I was like, well, I can't tell my guy friends. Granted, I didn't really have a lot of guy friends, but I was like, I can't tell them. They're going to think I'm gross. They won't understand. They're going to think I'm trying to get with them, whatever it may be. And I was like, well, I'm not allowed to talk to my girlfriends then. So who can I tell? I guess I can't tell anybody.
Yeah.
So when I told, Caitlin is her name. Love you, Caitlin, if you're listening. When I told her that, I was like, it was this huge weight. And she just responded with just such love, grace, and tears. And we didn't even know each other. Like this was really our first time talking. I'm not going to lie. And now she's such a dear friend, but like she just poured that out. And was like, and then immediately said something that put another weight. She's like, you got to tell your parents. I was like, ooh. Which I did. I went home and I told my parents that night. And I'm so grateful that I did. Because I kind of told them, I was like, hey, like, growing up, I just was scared to tell you because anytime something with like that related to gay was on TV, like it was just a response of like, or that's gross, or like it was always repulsion. And I was like, and I was scared that if I told you that this is something I'm struggling with, that, you would disown me and that you would find me gross and not, want to be with me. And when I said that, my dad just broke down crying. And we just had this like really sweet moment, and he like apologized and just, poured so much love at me. And I know that's not everyone's story, but I'm grateful that my parents were just so loving and God honoring in their response of just like, hey, like, let's come alongside you. And that's not like, let's just be there for you. Meant a lot. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Shout out to the King parents for being there and showing that just that godly example of what it looks like to graciously still love somebody. Even in their struggle and even in their hurt, like that. So shout out Mom and Dad King.
Yes. Yeah. I'm really grateful. My dad's no longer with us. He went home with the Lord, but I'm glad that I was able to just have that moment and know that like he knew, quote unquote, everything about me and still loved me and still cared about me to the point of like, he wasn't ashamed. Cause it's like, God's not ashamed of us. So it's like if my earthly father, who was a sinful man, can not be ashamed and love me, like how much more is my heavenly Father who created me gonna love me despite anything? So
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And we're not even at this point in the story yet. Getting choked up a little bit here. Like that's such an incredible thing. And your dad would be proud of you of just the steps that you've taken and just that the journey that you're continuing to journey and you're trying to help other people. Like your dad's response helped set you up for where you are today. So like, that's so beautiful that now you're in a position and kind of spoiling as we're going into the story, but like you're in a position where you want to help other people that are maybe struggling with this as well. So that's so beautiful. Father King, who, and God, our Father, the King, for just loving you, and helping set up this beautiful story and process and journey you've been on over the past many years. So, so you start telling your parents then, and they were loving and accepting of you as their son and saying, you know what, like the old cliche thing, hate the sinner or love the sinner. Nope. Love the sinner, hate the sin, like that sort of thing. So what was that like then with your relationship with your parents after that?
Yeah, no, it, we definitely I felt like I could talk to them a little bit more. We still didn't talk a ton about it, just in general. But over the years, like I've shared more things with my mom, and I've talked to her, and I feel like she really knows who I am and the things that I've been through, and there's no shame there. And being able to loop I have an older brother too, and being able to loop him in recently too, and kind of filling him in on my life has been such a blessing too. And hearing his response to that has been really, really awesome.
So what would you tell somebody who might be listening that's struggling with that, and they're like, I'm struggling with homosexual thoughts, I'm struggling with identity issues, I'm struggling with these things. What would you tell them as they're holding these things and they're saying, I'm alone in this and nobody else is going to understand? And that's just lies from the devil of like people believing that I'm the only one who believes that this is wrong and I'm living it. How do I tell somebody else? How would you encourage somebody in that?
Yeah, I would say you're not alone. I think so often, especially with that sin, it tends to get separated and tends to get set aside as something different or out there. But it's very much in like within the church that there's a lot of people having those thoughts and are in those, those circles, whether they're actively claiming that title or not. I think that telling someone you love that means a lot to you could be extremely beneficial. Obviously, do it with safety if you're at risk of, maybe not having a home, maybe seek someone else out. But having someone who really cares about you, I think is huge. And also that there's a lot of love within the church that sometimes gets misrepresented outside in other circles. But there are people that really, really care about you if you let them. So let people care about you.
And that's so good too, because so many people who are like, well, I've never struggled with that, or that's somebody else's problem. And they're like, well, I can tune out right now. Like, no, I'd encourage you, continue listening, because there's so much value in us hearing that other side of the story, because you never know what somebody's walking through around you, and being able to then be that person, like your parents who, and like Caitlin, who was there for you and like, you know what, like I hear the struggle you're going through and I understand that's real, and let me love you in grace, but also reveal some truth to you, just like the Lord does to us. He comes to us with grace and truth, not just truth and not just grace. It's a beautiful blend of both of those things. So I want to encourage you, continue listening as we process this story. Don't tune out, because there may be somebody around you that's walking through this, and they just need somebody to talk to and be around. And
I think you bring up a good point there too. I think it's so often within the church very easy to point out what to fix in people, and to point out like what we don't believe is right and try to fix that. Especially when it comes to something as personal as sexuality. Like it's not as simple as flipping a switch. It's not like it's very ingrained in, neural pathways and how things work. So you sometimes someone just needs someone to come alongside them, maybe provide some truth when the moment's right, but not to condemn, not to, point out that's the wrong, like what's wrong with them. Because if they're not at that place of, if they don't have a traditional Christian sexual ethic yet, and they are affirming at that point, they need a friend. They need somebody to come alongside them and to love them and to support them as a person, even if you don't support all their choices. But as friends, do we ever support our friends and all their choices? So it's like, just be a light to that community, especially whether they are Christian or not Christian, whether they're claiming the title or claiming other titles. Just pour into them and just be a friend, because that's isolation is how the devil really gets us. And like that is a community, it's a broken community. But if we're going to tell or ask people of like, hey, like, that's the Bible doesn't support this, so how, like, you're taking them away from a community. We have to be a church to provide a community toward those people. And that's like, it's so essential.
And you're exactly right in that, where if we're as Christians, if we're not going to be the person that then takes them and again, not accepting their sin, but accepting them as a person and loving them, then who is going to? Correct. Then the world is going to. Who's going to say, yeah, you know what you're doing is right. What you're doing, that's how you feel is who you are, and that means it's good. Yeah. And if we don't do that, if we don't accept that mantle that's on us to share the truth and to share love and grace with people, then they're not going to receive that, and they're not going to know it, and they're not going to personally understand it, because all they're hearing is outside voices of the world speaking into and affirming what they're feeling and believing. And
their first and foremost, like, problem is not that they're gay or not that they're, sinning in whatever way it may be. Their first and foremost thing is that their identity is not in Christ.
Yep.
And so
that's so good.
Helping them, we're not the ones that, need to convict. We're not the ones that need to push people towards that. We need to push them towards Christ. So as they're seeking out their identity in Christ, they're seeking out him, he's going to keep revealing himself to them, and he's going to keep calling them up. It's like Angie says, she stole it from the Bible, but she said it to me. So she said that, like, that one verse in the Bible that's like, God says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. And we tend to read it as like, if you love me, wagging finger, like, you're going to keep my commandments. But it's the total opposite of, like, if you love me, like, you'll keep my commandments. Yeah. Like, because it's like, that's what we want to do. Yep. We want to, like, just honor our dad with what we do and how we live our life. So that's, I think, the one big thing for Christians who have somebody that they're caring for or care about that, relates to that community or adopts that community, is like, hey, like, just point them to Christ in any way you can, and don't come for their sin first. I think it's huge.
That's so good. So you start coming out to your family, and you're like, hey, this is where I'm struggling. This is where my life is. You did to your one friend. So where, we'll kind of move forward a little bit. Like, where does that take you next? Like, what does your next season of life look like?
Yeah. So I was kind of heading into college at this point and making college plans, and still trying to kind of had this, like, spiritual resurgence, I guess maybe is the word, of, like, pushing into God with that. Yeah. But still not letting it go. Still holding on, still not willing to fully surrender that. And I remember I went on a college visit with my mom, and I was planning on going there, and I look back on photos from that day, and it kind of makes me sad, because, like, just I can see the spiritual turmoil in my heart. And what I wanted to do. Like, I knew if I went off to that college, I wouldn't be walking with the Lord anymore. I would have just fully embraced.
That's discernment in your heart, like recognizing that.
Well, no, I was planning on going.
Oh, you're still planning on going. Oh, that's discernment now. Looking back,
this is where God is like starts to be really amazing. I mean, he's always been amazing in my life, but, like, he basically. So I was going for marketing, and he gave me a marketing job, which was full-time. So I couldn't go to school for marketing. I couldn't go away for it. So I had to then just switch to everything being online. So I ended up not going off to this college, but staying rooted in this area. Still going to the church I grew up at the time. But after that, Victory kind of enters the scene pretty soon. So, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to pause his story there. There's so much goodness yet in Nate's story. So I want to encourage you guys. This is going to be a two-parter. Come back and listen next week, because we're just at the tip of what Nate's walking through in his life, and just what God's about to do in his life, and just the transformation we're about to see. And you're already hearing it throughout this podcast, just the goodness that Nate has experienced himself, and the grace of the Lord in this journey. So thank you, Nate, for sharing so far. And we hope to have all of our listeners back next week as we listen to part 2 of Nate's story. Thank you for joining us on this episode of This Is My Story. Hearing these incredible accounts of God's work in our lives reminds us of the enduring power of faith. If you've been moved by these stories, don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform and on YouTube. And don't forget to share the inspiration with others who might need it. This Is My Story is recorded at Victory Church in the heart of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. You can learn more about This Is My Story and Victory Church in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and be blessed.